The record is brief. A single line in a restricted Vatican log notes the arrival of an unnamed courier at a side entrance near the Cortile del Belvedere. Date, time, authorization seal. Nothing more. No description, no departure entry, no follow-up notation. In an institution obsessed with documentation, absence like this is not an oversight. It is a statement. Vatican City is not merely a religious center. It is one of tightly controlled microstates on Earth. Cameras track corridors, guards log movements, and every visitor, especially one bearing sealed cargo, is accounted for multiple times over. Couriers do not wander. They are escorted, timed, and signed in and out with ritual precision. Yet this man enters the Vatican's internal records as if stepping onto a stage and then vanishes from the script. Later testimonies from archive personnel describe a strange certainty surrounding that day. Nothing felt disrupted, no alarms, no emergency reports. The routine of the Vatican continued uninterrupted, which deepens the unease. If the courier had fled, someone would have noticed. If he had died, there would be a record. If he had been detained, there would be paperwork. Instead, there is silence. Historians who have encountered this entry pause at the name question. How does a person disappear inside a place designed to prevent exactly that? The Vatican is small, enclosed, and meticulously monitored, yet it absorbed this man without trace. It is as though the walls closed behind him. What remains is a timestamp and an implication. Someone entered carrying something important enough to be logged at the highest level. Whatever happened next was never meant to be found, and the last recorded footsteps are not just a mystery of movement, but the opening signal of a story the Vatican refuses to finish. The courier was not clergy, not a Swiss guard, and not listed among the Vatican's permanent personnel. His name appears nowhere in public church records because he was never meant to. Instead, his authorization bore an emergency seal, used so rarely that most cardinals never encounter it in their lifetime. When that seal is invoked, normal hierarchy dissolves. Questions are not asked, orders are followed. Internal references describe him as an external envoy, linked to a lineage older than the modern church itself. Not officially Templar, yet operating within a tradition that survived the order's destruction by becoming invisible. For centuries, such couriers carried items deemed too dangerous, too destabilizing, or too contradictory to doctrine to ever be openly archived. They did not answer to bishops. They did not answer to cardinals. They answered only to the seal. The seal itself is key. It authorizes immediate access to restricted vaults and overrides standard logging procedures. It is meant for moments of existential risk when containment matters more than transparency. Wars have been paused for it. Councils have been bypassed. Its appearance signals that something has resurfaced that was never meant to return. What the courier carried is never described directly, but the language surrounding the mission is revealing. Phrases like pre-canonical origin material and non-theological historical artifacts appear in fragmented annotations. This was not scripture. It was evidence. Evidence capable of unsettling the church's most carefully guarded narratives. Silence, in this case, was not reverence, but defense. Whatever lay in those sealed crates demanded secrecy even from the highest religious authorities. And if a single man was entrusted with delivering it under a seal powerful enough to erase his own existence, the question becomes unavoidable. What knowledge is so dangerous that the Vatican would rather lose a man than let the truth be spoken? And if this mission truly ranked above cardinals themselves, then the disappearance was not an accident, but a controlled outcome, suggesting that the cargo was never the greatest risk. the Courier was. Silence was the final instruction he obeyed, completely, forever. Decades after the Courier's disappearance, a historian working under temporary Vatican clearance noticed a reference that seemed out of place. It was not a document, not even a file in the traditional sense, but a cross-index notation embedded between routine catalog numbers. Most readers would have passed over it without thought. This one did not. The notation was heavily redacted, reduced to fragments and classification codes, yet a single phrase remained legible: non-canonical Mesopotamian origin texts. The wording was precise, deliberate, and deeply troubling. Mesopotamian texts did not belong in Vatican custody, and origin texts suggested beginnings, not commentary. This was not theology. It was prehistory. The file itself could not be requested. Attempts to locate it triggered automated denials, followed by polite warnings about exceeding research scope. When the historian inquired informally, the response was silence, then reassignment. Within weeks, his clearance expired early. The reference, however, remained burned into his memory. What makes this discovery disturbing is not just its content, but its existence. The Vatican's public position has always been clear. Ancient Near Eastern myths are acknowledged as cultural artifacts, not historical records. Yet this internal reference treated them differently, classifying them alongside materials requiring the highest containment protocols. Even more unsettling was a marginal code attached to the notation, identical to the one used in the Courier's arrival log. It suggested continuity, a chain, something delivered and then buried so deeply it could only be referenced indirectly. By acknowledging such a file, even in redacted form, the Vatican admitted to possessing material that challenges its own doctrinal foundations. The file should not exist because its existence alone implies recognition that humanity's story may not begin where we were taught it does. And if the Vatican knows this, then the disappearance of a courier was not about secrecy alone. It was about control over the oldest truth humanity has ever uncovered. That single reference lingers like a confession half spoken, suggesting the Church does not merely guard faith, but quietly guards a history it cannot afford to release to the world ever. When Pope Clement V declared the Knights Templar dissolved in 1312, the world was told the order had been erased. Its leaders were arrested, its symbols outlawed, its wealth seized. History books present this as an ending, but endings, especially in institutions built on secrecy, are rarely so clean. In the years following the dissolution, records show something strange. Templar properties were transferred, not destroyed. Their financial systems were absorbed into church banking. Their logistical routes, once used to move men and gold across Europe and the Levant, did not disappear. They were repurposed. Couriers continued to travel familiar paths, now under different banners. More telling is what never appears in the records. There is no comprehensive list of former Templars. No confirmation of where thousands of trained administrators, warriors, and messengers went. They did not simply dissolve into peasantry. They were too skilled, too connected, too useful. Over time, a pattern emerges. Specialized roles within church logistics mirror Templar structures almost exactly. Secure transport, financial mediation, information handling. These were the order's true strengths, and they survived because the church needed them. Publicly condemning the Templars satisfied political pressure. Quietly absorbing their infrastructure preserved power. This is how secret orders survive, not through rebellion, but through integration. By becoming invisible, they become eternal. The Templars did not vanish. They became a ghost within the Vatican's machinery, resurfacing only when something ancient, dangerous, and unspeakable needed to move without leaving a trail. Their survival explains why, centuries later, when forbidden knowledge reappeared, the church did not turn to soldiers or scholars. It turned to the order that never truly died. What followed was not disappearance, but transformation, a survival strategy perfected in silence, patience, and obedience, waiting centuries for the next summons to come. The Vatican's most sensitive materials are not stored the way people imagine. They are not always sealed in vaults or hidden behind numbered shelves. Some knowledge is considered too volatile to ever sit still. Instead, it moves quietly, constantly. This is where the shadow courier network emerges. For centuries, the church has maintained a parallel system of transport reserved for items that cannot be formally cataloged. These couriers do not appear on standard manifests. Their routes shift without pattern. Their destinations are sometimes temporary, sometimes erased entirely once delivery is complete. The logic is simple. A document that never settles cannot be seized, audited, or exposed. Unlike conventional Vatican messengers, shadow couriers operate under fragmented authority. No single office oversees the entire route. Each handler knows only their portion, reducing risk through ignorance. If questioned, they cannot betray what they do not know. This system was not designed for efficiency, but for survival. Whispers from retired officials suggest that this network predates the modern Vatican state. It evolved from medieval necessity, when dangerous ideas traveled faster than armies. Heretical texts, forbidden maps, and unclassifiable artifacts were moved this way, passed hand to hand like contraband truths. What makes this network unsettling is its philosophy. Knowledge is treated as a living threat, capable of spreading simply by being seen. So it is kept in motion like a contained infection. The courier becomes a temporary vessel, carrying something that cannot be allowed to remain anywhere for long. This reframes the disappearance entirely. If some knowledge is never meant to rest, then a courier's vanishing is not failure. It is protocol. The shadow network does not preserve information for posterity. It preserves control. And when something reaches the point where even movement is too dangerous, the system adapts. The knowledge stops traveling. So does the man who carried it. If the Vatican possessed a shadow network, it still had choices. It could have entrusted the mission to clergy, intelligence intermediaries, or state allies. Instead, it relied on a lineage officially condemned centuries earlier. That choice was not nostalgic. It was strategic. The Templars were never valued solely as warriors. Their true power lay in discretion, endurance, and absolute loyalty to mission over self. They operated across cultures, languages, and belief systems, often carrying secrets that contradicted the very institutions they served. This made them uniquely suited to handle material that threatened foundational narratives. Templar traditions preserved an understanding lost to the modern church, that belief systems are fragile, that history, when revealed too abruptly, can destroy civilizations. Long before doctrinal certainty, the Templars encountered ancient knowledge in the East that blurred the line between myth and record. They learned restraint. Unlike theologians, they were not tasked with explaining truth. Unlike scholars, they were not driven to publish it. Their role was containment through silence. The church may have outgrown them publicly, but it never replaced them functionally. Choosing a Templar-linked envoy to transport material tied to humanity's origins suggests recognition of that legacy. It implies the church understood this knowledge could not be debated, reinterpreted, or absorbed. It could only be controlled. The deeper implication is chilling. If the Templars were trusted, it is because they already knew something similar, something learned centuries earlier, something never written into doctrine. Their suppression may not have been punishment, but precaution. When the past resurfaced in the form of forbidden texts, the Vatican turned to the only group experienced in carrying truths too dangerous to survive daylight. The disappearance that followed was not betrayal, it was the final expression of a role they had always played. The excavation began without announcement in the desert plains of southern Iraq, far from tourist routes and official permits. Local workers were hired briefly, sworn to silence, then dismissed without explanation. No press releases followed, no academic previews, only a sudden perimeter guarded by foreign security contractors who never identified their sponsors. Satellite imagery later revealed trenches carved with surgical precision, exposing a structure older than the surrounding tells. Within weeks, the site was abandoned. Equipment vanished overnight. The ground was filled back in as if the dig had never occurred. Iraqi authorities were informed only after the fact, told the project it had been canceled due to environmental instability, a phrase that explained nothing. What drew attention was not the excavation itself, but what left the country afterward. Customs logs show several sealed crates transported under diplomatic immunity, flagged not by a nation state, but by the Vatican. The crates were classified as cultural artifacts, yet bypassed standard inspection entirely. No inventory was filed with Iraqi museums. No replicas were requested. The originals were simply gone. Witnesses recalled the crates were unusually heavy for stone tablets, reinforced with internal frames and shock dampeners. They were handled with ritual care, escorted at all times, never left unattended. This was not looting. It was retrieval. The dig was halted without public justification, but its timing matters. It coincided with rising instability in the region, a moment when attention could be diverted easily. Under cover of chaos, something ancient was extracted and removed with extraordinary speed. Unauthorized excavations happen often in conflict zones, but they rarely end with Vatican diplomatic seals. That detail transforms the story. It suggests foreknowledge, planning, and a destination prepared long before the first shovel touched the sand. No official record ever acknowledged what was taken from that place publicly. When the crates were finally opened, the problem became immediately clear. These were not ordinary cuneiform tablets awaiting careful translation. They were inconsistent, layered, and disturbingly precise, written across eras that should never overlap. Linguists brought in under non-disclosure agreements quickly grew uneasy. Symbols shifted between known Sumerian forms and structures that belonged centuries apart. Some tablets referenced dynasties that would not exist for thousands of years, while others described events predating any accepted human civilization. Chronology collapsed the moment serious analysis began. Even more troubling was the language used to describe authority. The text did not speak of kings as founders, but as inheritors. Rulers appeared only after something else, something earlier, had already shaped the world. One repeated phrase halted translation entirely: beings who descended before kings. That wording carried implications no scholar wanted to formalize. To acknowledge it, it would require admitting that the tablets describe non-human actors operating before recorded history. Several linguists withdrew from the project, citing ethical concerns and professional risk. Others refused outright, claiming the material was intentionally structured to resist linear translation. Requests to catalog the tablets were denied internally. They could not be placed within existing historical frameworks, without breaking them. If logged officially, they would force questions no institution could answer responsibly. Instead, the tablets were classified as anomalous artifacts, a designation rarely used and never explained publicly. Translation ceased, not because it was impossible, but because it was too effective, and the texts were saying too much, too clearly. What frightened the scholars was not mythological language. It was the absence of metaphor. These tablets read like records, procedural and unemotional, documenting actions rather than beliefs. They described arrivals, assignments, and outcomes with chilling neutrality. In that moment, the tablets stopped being ancient curiosities. They became liabilities. And once knowledge becomes dangerous, history shows it does not get studied further. It gets hidden. Those who glimpsed their contents understood that interpretation was not the risk, but belief. And belief once formed could never be reversed without consequence for humanity itself, forever beyond repair and memory alone remaining. Across the tablets, one name surfaced repeatedly, detached from context, yet central to every narrative strand. It appeared in administrative passages, in creation accounts, and in descriptions of authority that predated human rule. The name was Anunnaki. Modern readers often dismiss the Anunnaki as mythological figures, symbolic gods woven into Sumerian cosmology, but these tablets treated the name differently. It was not poetic, it was functional, used the way one might reference a governing body or an originating group. What made this disturbing was repetition across sources never meant to intersect. The tablets came from different layers, different periods, and different sites, yet the Anunnaki appeared consistently, unchanged by time or cultural drift. That consistency is rare in myth and common in record keeping. Some passages describe the Anunnaki as decision makers, others as engineers, still others as overseers who arrived, acted, and withdrew. There was no worship language, no prayers, only description. The texts did not ask for belief. They assumed awareness. Scholars realized these tablets had never been intended to be read together. Each made sense in isolation. Together, they formed a narrative too cohesive to ignore. The Anunnaki were not legends scattered across stories. They were the connecting thread. This realization triggered immediate containment. The tablets were separated, sealed, and reclassified. Cross-referencing was prohibited. Reading them as a collection was deemed unnecessary and discouraged without explanation. The name itself became the problem. Once noticed, it could not be unseen. It echoed across ancient history, resurfacing in places it should not exist. That echo threatened to collapse the boundary between myth and memory. By hiding the tablets, the Vatican did more than suppress information. It acknowledged a pattern it could not explain away. The Anunnaki were not denied, they were buried. And in that burial lies the most unsettling question of all. If these beings never existed, why was so much effort spent ensuring their story could never be fully told? The silence surrounding them suggests fear, not of fiction, but of recognition that humanity remembers more than doctrine, allows us to. The tablets do not read like prayers. They do not glorify, praise, or beg. Instead, they document instructions, sequences, outcomes. The Anunnaki are not addressed as divine mysteries, but referenced as operational actors appearing in passages the way administrators or specialists might appear in a modern report. Descriptions focus on what was done, not who was worshipped. There are references to arrivals, allocations of tasks, and decisions carried out according to design. The language is sterile, almost bureaucratic. No hymns, no moral judgments, only processes unfolding step by step. In several fragments, the Anunnaki are associated with tools rather than temples. Instruments, measurements, and materials appear alongside their actions. This is not how ancient peoples described gods. It is how they described craftsmen, planners, or overseers. The tone suggests familiarity, not reverence. What unsettles scholars most is consistency. The Anunnaki are never questioned in the texts. Their authority is assumed, not debated. They are not symbolic forces of nature, but entities whose presence requires no explanation. The tablets read as if their existence was common knowledge at the time of writing. This forces an uncomfortable reinterpretation. If the Anunnaki were not gods in the religious sense, then what were they? Engineers, visitors, something entirely outside modern categories. The tablets refuse to answer directly, but they narrow the possibilities. By stripping divinity from the language, the texts strip comfort from the reader. They replace faith with function. Creation becomes activity. Authority becomes technical. The Anunnaki problem begins here, not with wild theories, but with plain language that refuses to mythologize what it describes. That refusal is what makes the tablets so difficult to dismiss, because they sound less like belief and more like memory preserved without poetry or fear. Its clarity leaves no refuge for metaphor, only unease and unanswered implications. Within the tablets, the origin of humanity is not framed as a sacred moment, but as a sequence of modifications. Passages describe raw beings existing before refinement, followed by interventions that adjusted form, capacity, and purpose. The language is methodical, as if describing an experiment rather than an act of divine will. There are references to trial outcomes, corrections, and failures. Some versions of early humans are described as unstable, others as incomplete. The text suggests iteration, improvement, and selection. This alone stands in direct conflict with doctrine that presents creation as instantaneous and perfect. What is most troubling is the absence of reverence. Humanity is not portrayed as a crown of creation, but as a solution to a problem. The tablets imply labor shortages, environmental constraints, and resource management challenges that required a workforce capable of learning and obedience. In several fragments, the Anunnaki are described overseeing this process, not celebrating it. They adjust variables, observe results, and record outcomes. Creation unfolds across time, not in a moment. Progress replaces miracle. For the church, this narrative is catastrophic. If humanity was shaped through process, then the concept of original perfection collapses. Sin becomes irrelevant. Redemption becomes unnecessary. The theological structure built on a fallen creation loses coherence. Even more dangerous is implication of intent. If humans were altered, then someone decided what we would become. Intelligence, lifespan, and limitation appear deliberate. That suggests design without divinity. The Vatican understands the power of origin stories. They define purpose, obedience, and authority. To accept these tablets as historical records would force a rewriting of everything that follows. It would mean that faith rests not on revelation, but on omission. That is why this knowledge cannot be allowed to circulate freely. It does not attack belief directly. It undermines it quietly by replacing miracle with method and leaving humanity to confront the possibility that we were made, not chosen, and that truth alone could dismantle centuries of certainty beyond repair. The risk is not disbelief, but irreversible awakening without guidance or mercy, context, or return. The danger of the tablets does not lie in their strangeness, but in their coherence. They do not contradict theology loudly. they quietly replace it. If accepted, they compress sacred timelines, erasing the long arc from creation to revelation and replacing it with a much older, colder history. Church doctrine depends on sequence: creation, fall, redemption. Each step reinforces authority and purpose. The tablets disrupt this order by introducing actors before Adam, actions before Eden, and intent before God's spoken word. Time itself becomes unstable. Acknowledging these records would require admitting that the Church's version of origins is incomplete at best, curated at worst. That admission would not destroy faith overnight, but it would corrode it slowly, inviting questions no council could contain. This is why the Vatican's response appears defensive rather than dismissive. Silence becomes policy. Containment replaces debate. If the tablets were simple myths, they could be discussed openly. And their suppression suggests something else entirely. The most unsettling possibility is not that the Vatican fears these texts, but that it understands them, that it has compared them against other hidden archives, other suppressed fragments, and found alignment rather than contradiction. If the Church already knows, then secrecy is no longer about protection from error, but protection from truth, a truth capable of unraveling moral authority, human exceptionalism, and the very idea of divine selection. In this light, the Courier's disappearance becomes contextual. It was not about hiding objects, but preserving a narrative framework on which billions rely. Some knowledge, once acknowledged, cannot be unacknowledged. The danger is not chaos, but clarity, a clarity that reveals humanity as the product of decisions made long before faith, long before Scripture, long before history was written to comfort rather than inform. If that clarity ever escaped containment, belief would not vanish. It would fracture. And in those fractures, the Church fears not rebellion, but realization. The realization that the Vatican may have been guarding not God's mysteries, but humanity's oldest and destabilizing memory all along, waiting for a time when the world could survive knowing it. The Courier's final journey does not exist as a single narrative. It survives only in fragments scattered across unrelated systems, each designed for a different purpose, never meant to be read together. Shipping manifests confirm the departure of sealed crates from southern Iraq under diplomatic immunity. Border control stamps show a smooth passage through multiple jurisdictions without secondary inspection. Airline cargo logs list weight and clearance codes, but no descriptions. Everywhere, movement is recorded, yet meaning is absent. Inside Vatican documentation, the trail narrows further. An internal intake log confirms arrival at a secondary gate, time-stamped and validated. A handwritten notation indicates escort transfer, though no escort is named. This is unusual. Escorts are always named. Their anonymity suggests pre-authorization beyond routine protocol. What stands out is precision. The Courier's movements up to that moment are flawless. No delays, no deviations. Each transition aligns perfectly as if the route had been rehearsed. That level of coordination implies planning far beyond a standard delivery. Then the record thins. There is no confirmation of offloading, no signature acknowledging receipt. Only the arrival remains, suspended without conclusion. The fragments form a path that leads inward, deeper into Vatican space, then stops abruptly. Reconstructing the journey raises an uncomfortable realization: the system functioned exactly as designed. Nothing went wrong along the route. The breakdown occurred only at the destination, inside the most controlled environment of all. This suggests the Courier's disappearance was not the result of error or interference along the way. It was the endpoint. The journey was always meant to end where the records end, leaving behind just enough trace to confirm arrival, and nothing to explain what followed, locking the truth behind silence and fragmented memory. After the courier passed through the restricted wing, time fractures. For 8 hours, there are no confirmed sightings, no guard logs, no camera footage flagged for review. In a city where every movement is layered with redundancy, this absence is profound. The wing he entered houses administrative corridors leading toward deeper archival zones. Access requires multiple clearances, yet no access violations were reported. Guards stationed along adjacent routes later stated nothing unusual occurred. No escort returned, no courier exited. It is as if the man stepped into a blind spot that should not exist. Investigators who later examined the gap found no evidence of tampering. Cameras were functional, logs were intact. The system did not fail, it simply recorded nothing. This is more disturbing than a malfunction. It implies selective omission. 8 hours is too long for routine processing and too short for formal detainment. It is a duration that suggests deliberation, decisions made behind closed doors, consultations, assessments, possibly containment procedures initiated quietly without triggering alarms or paperwork. What makes the gap unbearable to explain is that no one claims responsibility for it. No department acknowledges custody. No office admits oversight. The courier does not appear in medical logs, security reports, or disciplinary records. He does not exist. During those hours, this absence forces a grim interpretation. The courier was neither lost nor forgotten. He was removed from visibility. Those 8 hours represent a transition, not between locations, but between statuses, from person to problem, from messenger to liability. And whatever decision was reached in that silent span was final enough to erase every trace of him afterward. The Vatican security systems are designed to prevent disappearance, not enable it. Layers of oversight ensure accountability through documentation. When those layers produce nothing, the implication is unavoidable. This was not failure. It was instruction. Orders that override logging protocols exist, but they are rare and tightly controlled. They require authority at the highest level, justification classified beyond standard review, and compliance without question. When invoked, they create gaps by design, gaps that cannot be audited later. If such an order was issued, it explains everything: silent cameras, the absent logs, the guards who saw nothing because they were instructed not to see. Security did not break down. It stood aside. This reframes the disappearance entirely. The courier was not intercepted by an unknown force. He was absorbed by the system itself. His removal served a purpose deemed more important than transparency, legality, or life. The question then shifts, not what happened, but who decided, who possesses the authority to suspend record keeping, override accountability, and erase a human presence without trace. This authority exists, but it is never named publicly. Such power is reserved for moments when knowledge itself becomes dangerous, when containment must extend beyond objects and documents to the people who touch them. If the courier was erased, it was because he knew something that could not be allowed to exist freely. The final horror lies in acceptance. Every system involved complied. No whistleblowers emerged. No inquiries followed. Silence held. Someone ordered a man to disappear, and the order was obeyed flawlessly. If that authority exists, it has been used before. And if it can erase one courier, it can erase anyone who carries a truth deemed too destabilizing to survive. Official Vatican maps end where stone corridors meet bedrock, yet stories persist of passages that continue downward. Archivists, maintenance staff, and clergy who have spent decades within the apostolic palace speak quietly of sealed stairwells, doors without markings, and routes omitted from every published plan. These are not legends shared with tourists, but murmured certainties exchanged between people who have learned where not to ask questions. According to these accounts, the lowest levels are not extensions of the apostolic archive, but something older. Chambers carved before modern cataloging existed, designed not for access, but for isolation. Some doors are sealed permanently, their keys removed from circulation generations ago. Others open only under rare authorization, then vanish again into silence. What distinguishes these spaces is intention. Archives preserve. These rooms contain. Their architecture favors separation over storage, thick walls over shelving, narrow entrances over grand halls. They were never meant to be visited frequently, only when something needed to be placed beyond ordinary reach. Several retired officials have described being guided past such doors without explanation, instructed not to slow or look too closely. One recalled a corridor that appeared on no floor plan, yet connected seamlessly to known sections as if the building itself had been edited. The Vatican does not deny underground structures, but it denies specificity. That vagueness is telling. If these rooms did not matter, they would be documented. Their omission suggests purpose. In this context, the Courier's final route takes on new meaning. He did not vanish into confusion. He may have been guided downward into spaces designed for things that cannot remain in circulation. If such chambers exist, then disappearance is not mysterious. It is architectural. The apostolic palace does not only rise toward heaven, it descends quietly into places where history is not studied, but locked away deliberately forever. Among Vatican archivists, there is an unspoken distinction between materials that age and those that do not. Most documents pass through stages: acquisition, cataloging, study, and eventual public acknowledgement. Others may remain suspended. They are reviewed periodically, assessed, and returned to the same sealed state without ever entering the formal record. Archivists who have encountered such materials describe a strange routine. They are summoned, given limited access, instructed to verify condition rather than content. No notes are allowed, no classifications assigned. When the task ends, the document returns to storage unchanged, as if time itself does not apply to it. These items never receive updated references. Their language never evolves through reinterpretation. Decades pass, leadership changes, yet the material remains exactly as it was first sealed. It does not age because it is never allowed to participate in history. This practice contradicts the very purpose of an archive, which is preservation through engagement. Here, preservation is achieved through denial. The document exists, but is prevented from influencing scholarship, doctrine, or debate. Several archivists have quietly admitted that such materials are reviewed not for knowledge, but for risk. The question is never what they say, but whether they still say it clearly, whether they remain intact enough to remain dangerous. If the Anunnaki tablets entered this category, their fate was sealed immediately. They would not be studied, only monitored. Their survival would be ensured precisely by preventing their integration into any system of understanding. This creates a chilling possibility. Knowledge can be frozen, not destroyed, held in perpetual suspension, like a threat that never expires. In such a system, truth does not disappear. It is simply denied movement, waiting patiently while centuries pass above it, unchanged and unresolved. If the sealed rooms exist, and if certain documents are never meant to age, then the Courier's disappearance appears less accidental and more procedural. Delivery may not have been the end of his mission. It may have been the trigger. Containment protocols do not apply only to objects. They apply to exposure. Anyone who sees too much becomes part of the problem to be managed. In this light, the courier was not a victim of circumstance, but a variable accounted for from the beginning. The precision of his route, the absence of exit records, and the 8 hours of silence suggest foreknowledge. He was entrusted with delivery precisely because he could be contained afterward, a disposable constant in an equation designed to minimize risk. While this possibility reframes every decision, the emergency seal, the anonymous escort, the lack of documentation, each element aligns with a scenario in which departure was never planned. If the courier entered a sealed chamber, he may have crossed a threshold with no return protocol, not because of malice, but necessity. Knowledge deemed too destabilizing requires absolute control. That control extends to witnesses. The most unsettling aspect is efficiency. There was no struggle, no disruption, no trace. The system functioned smoothly, quietly absorbing both cargo and carrier. If this theory is correct, then the disappearance was not a crime. It was policy, a policy refined over centuries to ensure certain truths remain inaccessible. The question that lingers is not what happened to the courier, but how many times this has happened before. How many deliveries ended in silence? How many people vanished, not because something went wrong, but because everything went exactly as intended? The disappearance of scholars is rarely dramatic. There are no arrests, no public trials, no sudden announcements. Instead, their ideas fade. Papers stop being cited. Books slip out of print. Lectures are quietly canceled. What remains is an absence that only becomes noticeable in retrospect. In the decades following the discovery of anomalous Mesopotamian tablets, several researchers briefly brushed against the same forbidden pattern. Assyriologists, historians of religion, and comparative linguists published cautious references to inconsistencies in early Sumerian records. They did not claim extraterrestrial gods or cosmic interventions. They simply noted that certain tablets describe non-human actors with unsettling precision. For a short time, their work circulated normally. Then it stalled. University libraries reported misplaced volumes that were never recovered. Journals archived articles without explanation. Digital records returned error messages where citations should have been. The scholars themselves remained alive and free, but their intellectual presence was erased. What unites these cases is restraint. None of these academics sensationalized their findings. They did not chase attention. They asked careful, methodical questions. That may have been the problem. Their work threatened to normalize inquiry into material that thrives only in isolation. In some cases, the erasure was subtle enough to be dismissed as coincidence. In others, it was too thorough. Entire research threads vanish, leaving gaps where debate should have continued. Younger scholars searching for sources found references to works that no longer existed. This form of disappearance is effective precisely because it avoids confrontation. No one is punished openly. No controversy erupts. The ideas simply fail to survive. Over time, it becomes easier to believe they were never credible in the first place. Yet patterns remain. The topics that vanished share a common boundary. They approached origins too closely. They treated myth as record, and they stumbled briefly into a space where curiosity outpaced permission. That space does not tolerate persistence. It absorbs it quietly, leaving behind a scholarly silence that feels intentional rather than accidental. For those who pressed further, the consequences were more personal. Careers unraveled not through accusation, but through attrition. Grants were denied without explanation. Conference invitations stopped arriving. Peer reviews became inexplicably hostile, dismissing work as speculative regardless of evidence. Several scholars who attempted to contextualize Anunnaki references reported pressure to retract or revise their conclusions. Officially, these requests cited methodological concerns. Unofficially, the message was clear. Some questions were unwelcome. A few complied, issuing retractions framed as clarifications. Their careers stabilized, but their work never returned to its original depth. Others refused. They found themselves isolated, their credibility eroded by whispers rather than facts. Departments distanced themselves. Students were advised to choose safer mentors. What is striking is the lack of a visible enforcer. No institution claimed responsibility. No authority issued bans. The pressure came from everywhere and nowhere at once, as if the academic ecosystem itself had developed an immune response. This kind of collapse leaves no villain to confront. It is professional suffocation, slow and deniable. Those affected often blamed themselves, questioning whether they had overreached. Doubt replaced confidence, and silence followed naturally. In private correspondence, some admitted fear, not of reprisal, but of meaninglessness, of realizing that certain truths, once glimpsed, could not be shared without consequence. That isolation was not imposed by force, but by understanding. The message spread without being written. Study these tablets if you wish. Do not connect them. Do not interpret them as history. Do not suggest continuity. Those who ignored the warning learned that knowledge can destroy a career without ever raising its voice. This pattern reveals a system more effective than censorship. It does not forbid inquiry. It makes inquiry unsustainable. And by the time a scholar understands this, it is already too late to turn back without losing everything they have built. Over time, an invisible boundary emerges. It is not marked by law or doctrine, but by consequence. Scholars sense it intuitively, a line beyond which curiosity becomes liability. Most cross it only once. Those who approach it notice subtle signals. Mentors grow cautious. Editors hesitate. Colleagues change the subject. The boundary is enforced socially, professionally, and psychologically, without ever being acknowledged. This makes enforcement resilient. There is no office to dismantle, no policy to repeal. The system persists because everyone participates unconsciously. Fear of marginalization does the work that force never needs to. The most unsettling aspect is effectiveness. Once crossed, the line becomes self-policing. Survivors warn others indirectly through career advice and careful omissions. The boundary moves forward in time, invisible but intact. Who enforces it remains unclear. Perhaps no single authority does. Perhaps it is the accumulated will of institutions invested in stability over truth, or perhaps it is guided quietly by those who understand the consequences of certain revelations. If the Vatican is involved, it does not act alone. The suppression of dangerous knowledge requires cooperation across academia, publishing, and funding structures. This suggests a shared understanding that some questions destabilize more than they enlighten. The line exists because it works. It ensures that forbidden knowledge remains fragmented, isolated, and incomplete. No one crosses it twice because crossing once is enough to learn the cost. For viewers, this raises a final unease. If such a boundary can exist without force, without declarations, and without resistance, then control over knowledge is far more sophisticated than censorship. It is cultural, it is internalized. And if scholars trained to pursue truth above comfort retreat from this line, what does that say about the power of what lies beyond it? The silence surrounding these questions may be the strongest evidence that someone, somewhere, understands exactly how dangerous the answers might be. When questions about the Courier finally surfaced, the Vatican responded in a way it has perfected over centuries, not with denial, but with deflection. Official statements acknowledged routine archival procedures, affirmed respect for historical scholarship, and emphasized that no verified evidence supported claims of irregular activity. What they did not do was address the Courier himself. The wording was careful. The Vatican denied possessing extraterrestrial or mythological records, a phrase no serious researcher had used. It dismissed speculative interpretations of ancient myths, while never mentioning the Mesopotamian tablets directly. Most notably, it avoided any reference to personnel movement, delivery logs, or the fate of an unnamed courier. This pattern is deliberate. By responding to arguments no one made, the Vatican shifted attention away from the unanswered question. It spoke broadly about doctrine, faith, and symbolism, while remaining silent on the procedural anomaly at the heart of the matter. Journalists who pressed further received polite but firm responses, emphasizing archival confidentiality. Requests for clarification were met with reiterations of policy rather than facts. The disappearance was neither confirmed nor denied. It simply did not exist within the framework of the response. This tactic creates a paradox. The Vatican appears cooperative while withholding substance. It satisfies casual inquiry but frustrates serious investigation. The absence of contradiction allows the issue to dissolve in ambiguity. What makes these statements unsettling is their consistency. Across decades, spokespersons changed, popes changed, yet the language remained stable. The same phrases resurfaced as if drawn from a prepared lexicon designed for moments when explanation would create more risk than silence. By refusing to name the Courier, the Vatican avoided responsibility without lying. The question remained unanswered, not because it was unimportant, but because answering it would require acknowledging a process the Church prefers to keep unseen. In that refusal, the denial reveals its true purpose, not to correct misinformation, but to redirect attention away from a disappearance that was never meant to be discussed at all. Silence within Vatican communication was not absence. It is structure. Every word spoken publicly is chosen with awareness of what must remain unspoken. This creates a language where meaning lives between statements rather than inside them. In responses related to the tablets and the Courier, officials emphasized limits of verification rather than absence of knowledge. Phrases like "no record available for public review" appeared repeatedly. This does not mean records do not exist. It means they are not accessible. Another recurring phrase was "outside the scope of theological inquiry." This subtly reframes historical questions as matters of belief rather than evidence. By doing so, the Vatican positioned itself as spiritually focused while sidestepping material accountability. Strategic silence also appears in timing. Statements were released during broader news cycles, ensuring minimal scrutiny. Follow-ups were delayed until interest faded. The Church did not suppress conversation, it outweighted it. This language implies containment. Knowledge is acknowledged indirectly, boxed within categories that prevent further probing. The Vatican does not claim ignorance. It claims jurisdictional boundaries. Even denials are conditional. Words like confirmed, verified and recognized recur. These are not absolutes. They leave room for internal acknowledgement without public admission. For historians, this is revealing. Institutions that truly lack information tend to say so plainly. Institutions that possess sensitive knowledge speak cautiously, aware that missteps can expose more than intended. Strategic silence functions as a shield. It prevents escalation while signaling to insiders that the matter is handled. Outsiders hear dismissal. Insiders hear warning. In this way, language becomes a containment tool, not to erase truth, but to keep it from spreading. The Vatican's silence does not deny the mystery. It stabilizes it, holding it in place without resolution, ensuring it remains inaccessible to those without clearance to read between the lines. At a certain point, denial stops being neutral. It becomes informative. Patterns emerge not from what is said, but from what is consistently avoided. In the case of the Courier, this pattern is unmistakable. No statement ever explains how a courier exits Vatican custody. No protocol is outlined. No assurance of welfare is offered. These omissions matter. If nothing unusual occurred, reassurance would be simple. Instead, the Vatican chose ambiguity. That choice carries weight. Institutions skilled in crisis management do not leave gaps unintentionally. When they do, it is because filling them would reveal more than intended. The refusal to close the narrative implies it cannot be closed cleanly. Any definitive statement would invite verification. Silence avoids that risk. For observers, this creates an inversion of trust. The less the Vatican says, the more meaningful the silence becomes. Denial repeated without clarification begins to suggest containment rather than confusion. This does not prove the tablet's contents or the courier's fate, but it supports the existence of a problem deemed too sensitive for resolution. Problems that do not exist are easily dismissed. Problems that threaten foundational narratives are managed quietly. In the Vatican's, denials function like a shadow cast by an unseen object. The shape suggests something real blocking the light. When viewed alongside vanished scholars, sealed archives, and erased roots, the silence aligns too well to be coincidence. It fits into a broader pattern of control exercised without visibility. Denial becomes evidence not of guilt, but of awareness. Awareness that some truths, once acknowledged, cannot be recontained. In the end, the Vatican's refusal to answer may be the most honest response possible. It tells us that the story touches something still unresolved, still active, still dangerous enough to require silence. And in that silence, the mystery deepens, not because answers are impossible, but because someone, somewhere, believes the world is not ready to hear them yet. The most unsettling theory begins with a simple assumption. The courier did not disappear because of what he carried, but because of what he learned. In systems designed to manage dangerous information, exposure itself becomes a variable. Objects can be sealed, documents can be buried, people cannot be unread. Couriers entrusted with forbidden material are expected to remain ignorant of its contents. Yet complete ignorance is rarely possible. Handling ancient tablets, hearing fragments of translation, observing the urgency surrounding them, these impressions accumulate. Knowledge does not require full understanding to become dangerous. Sometimes awareness alone is enough. If the courier understood even partially what the tablets implied, he ceased to be neutral. He became a witness. And witnesses within containment logic are unpredictable. They remember, they question, they speak even unintentionally. This reframes the disappearance as risk management. The courier's value ended the moment delivery was complete. His continued existence introduced uncertainty into a system built on control. Eliminating that uncertainty would not require malice, only protocol. There is historical precedent for this logic. Intelligence agencies have long treated individuals exposed to destabilizing truths as liabilities rather than assets. Silence is ensured not through punishment, but through removal. What makes this theory chilling is its calmness. No violence is required, no secrecy breaches occur. The courier simply becomes part of what is contained, a human extension of the archive. If true, his fate was sealed not by betrayal, but by competence. He was chosen because he could complete the mission. He vanished because completion made him unnecessary. In this light, the disappearance is not mysterious, it is efficient. The courier was never meant to carry the truth back into the world. He carried it only far enough to disappear with it. The concept of a knowledge quarantine is not new. Civilizations have always restricted information deemed too disruptive for social order. What is different here is scale. The theory suggests that certain truths are not dangerous to individuals, but to civilization itself. According to this view, the Anunnaki tablets describe origins so destabilizing that their release would fracture humanity's shared narrative. Religion, governance, and identity all rely on agreed beginnings. Remove those, and consensus collapses. A knowledge quarantine does not destroy information, it isolates it. Like a pathogen, the truth is contained to prevent spread. Those exposed are monitored. Circulation is prevented. Over time, the danger fades, not because the information disappears, but because access does. In this framework, the Vatican becomes less a suppressor of truth and more a custodian of stability. Its role is not to decide what is true, but what is survivable. This explains the patterns observed: sealed rooms, frozen documents, silent scholars, disappearing couriers. Each element serves the same goal: preventing uncontrolled dissemination. The most disturbing aspect is cooperation. Such a quarantine could not exist without widespread institutional alignment. Academia, religion, and power structures would need to agree tacitly or explicitly that some truths are too costly. This does not require conspiracy, only shared interest. Stability benefits everyone in authority. Chaos benefits no one. If the tablets were placed under quarantine, then the courier's fate becomes procedural. He crossed into contaminated space and could not return, not because he was punished, but because release would risk exposure. This theory challenges the idea that suppression is always malicious. It suggests something more frightening, that those in control believe they are protecting humanity from knowledge it cannot integrate without collapse. At the deepest level, the theories converge into a single, unbearable question. What if the truth was buried not to deceive us, but to save us? What if humanity was never meant to fully understand its own origins? The tablets imply a history where humans are not central actors, but outcomes, products of decisions made by others for purposes we may never fully grasp. Such a realization would strip meaning from progress, faith, and self-determination. Perhaps this is why the knowledge was hidden so thoroughly, not because it is false, but because it is complete. Completion leaves no room for interpretation, no space for belief. If humanity learned it was engineered, refined, or managed, concepts like destiny and free will would fracture. Moral systems built on divine selection would lose authority. Civilization would face an existential identity crisis. From this perspective, burial becomes mercy, silence becomes stewardship. The Vatican's role shifts from deceiver to guardian, holding a truth too heavy for the world to carry. But this raises another dread. If humanity was not meant to know, who decided that? And do they still decide what we are allowed to understand? The idea that our ignorance is intentional implies ongoing oversight, that someone, somewhere, still monitors what truths surface and which remain buried. The courier, the scholars, the sealed rooms all become parts of a larger mechanism designed to keep humanity within psychological limits. The most frightening possibility is not that the Anunnaki existed, but that their legacy persists, not through return, but through control of knowledge. Humanity may be living inside a carefully maintained narrative, protected from a past that would shatter its sense of self. If that is true, then the disappearance of a courier is not an anomaly, it is a reminder. A reminder that some truths are not lost because they were forgotten, but because remembering them might change everything in ways no one is prepared to survive. Long after memories fade and administrations change, some records refuse to close. Deep within internal reference systems, the courier's entry remains marked with a status that should not persist for decades. Active, not archived, not resolved, active. This designation is rarely used, reserved for matters awaiting conclusion. In most cases, activity implies ongoing investigation, unresolved accountability, or continued relevance. For a missing courier, this status is anomalous. People do not remain active indefinitely. Files do not linger without reason. Those who have glimpsed the reference describe it as static yet alert, untouched by routine updates, but shielded from closure. No explanation accompanies the status. No summary resolves the disappearance. The file simply exists, suspended between acknowledgement and erasure. This suggests the matter was never finished. Whatever decision was made during those missing hours did not conclude the issue. It contained it. The difference is crucial. Containment implies potential recurrence, relevance, or risk that has not expired. Why would a vanished courier remain administratively alive? One explanation is that his fate is known but cannot be recorded. Another is that his role extends beyond his disappearance, tied to materials or knowledge still considered volatile. Files marked active require periodic review. Someone, somewhere, still checks this record, still ensures it remains inaccessible, still confirms that nothing has changed. And this detail dismantles the idea that the story belongs to the past. If the file remains open, then the implications remain unresolved. The courier is not a historical footnote. He is an ongoing concern. An active file suggests unfinished business. It hints that what he carried, what he knew, or what he became still matters. And if that is true, then the disappearance was not an end. It was a pause, holding something in place, waiting for a future moment when silence may no longer be sufficient. This mystery does not surface randomly. It emerges during moments of instability, wars, political upheavals, technological shifts, and cultural reckonings. Each resurgence coincides with periods when humanity begins questioning its foundations. During global crises, attention turns to origins. People ask who we are, where we came from, and what authority structures truly represent. It is during these moments that fragments of suppressed history reappear, slipping through cracks widened by uncertainty. Scholars revisit abandoned threads. Journalists re-examine anomalies. Whistleblowers find courage in chaos. The story of the courier resurfaces not because it is new, but because conditions become temporarily favorable for dangerous questions. This pattern suggests containment is dynamic, not absolute. It relies on stability. When stability fractures, suppressed narratives strain against their limits. Each resurfacing is incomplete, a document reference here, a testimony there, enough to provoke curiosity, never enough to confirm truth. The system adapts, absorbing the disturbance until interest fades again. This cycle reveals something profound. The mystery persists because it has not been resolved, only managed. Like pressure beneath the surface, it seeks release when circumstances allow. Cultural shifts also play a role as belief systems weaken and institutional trust erodes. Alternative histories gain traction. The Anunnaki narrative finds fertile ground, not because it is sensational, but because official explanations feel insufficient. The Vatican does not respond aggressively to these resurgences. It waits. It has learned that time, distraction, and uncertainty are more effective than confrontation. Yet each return leaves residue. More people become aware, but more questions remain unanswered. The story grows heavier, harder to bury completely. This persistence suggests inevitability. A truth repeatedly suppressed does not disappear. It accumulates tension, and tension eventually seeks resolution. The question is not whether this story will surface again. It is when, and whether the world will be more prepared to confront what it implies when it does. At the end of this unraveling, one question remains untouched by denial, containment, or time. If the Anunnaki records were false, why were they hidden so thoroughly? Falsehoods do not require sealed chambers, vanished couriers, or frozen files. They can be dismissed openly. And if the records were real, then what are we being protected from? The scale of effort suggests fear not of ridicule, but of recognition. Recognition that humanity's origin story may be incomplete, that our sense of purpose may rest on a mission rather than revelation. The Vatican silence does not resolve this question. It sharpens it. Silence implies consequence. Perhaps the truth challenges religious authority. Perhaps it destabilizes social cohesion. Or perhaps it reveals that humanity's place in history is smaller, more fragile than we are willing to accept. The most chilling possibility is that the knowledge is not dangerous because of what it says about the past, but because of what it implies about the present. That oversight did not end. That control of knowledge continues. If humanity was shaped, refined, or guided once, it raises the question of whether that influence truly disappeared or whether it simply changed form. The Courier's disappearance, the sealed rooms, the silent scholars, all point to a single conclusion. This story is not about ancient gods or lost tablets. It is about control over narrative, memory, and identity. The record remains open because the question remains unanswered, and perhaps it always will, because if humanity ever fully understood its origins, it might no longer accept the limits placed upon it. And that possibility, more than any ancient being, may be what truly frightens those who guard the truth. Until then, the file stays active, the silence holds, and the question lingers in the dark, waiting for a moment when the world is ready to ask it without fear of the answer.